So, welcome back after the midterm. Basically what we're going to do today is talk about the midterm, and then we'll do a short preview of the rest of the semester, basically. Hi, yeah, question. Sorry? They are not already marked. I've just scanned the Scantron like half an hour ago, and I want to go through them all to see if there need to be any changes or updates to my answers. Michael's still marking the diagrams. That will definitely happen this weekend, however. He thought maybe Thursday night he'd have them done. So yeah, they're not quite marked yet, but I did get a look at the overall average on the Scantron, or the multiple choice. It was 75% was the average, which is not bad. And maybe we can bring it up a little if some of the answers can be broadened. So let's discuss. I did not put there's at least 2 students who still have to write makeup tests, so I'm not going to put the recording of this online just yet, and I'm not going to put the slides with a midterm on it just yet. They'll be writing a different one, but it's structurally similar to this, so it would be unfair for them to have like a nice written copy of it. But nonetheless, it'll be up by Monday. The slides and the recording will be online. So let's go through. I propose to go through the midterm. One question at a time. I'll say what I thought the answer was, and if you think there's a better answer or an equally good answer, then I will write that down and can be potentially a correct answer. So we should discuss each and every one of these to figure out what are the best answers. Sound good? Okay. Right. So, I believe most people got this one. In the context of, what is the definition of an argument in the context of this course? What is the correct answer? Or what is a correct answer? Oh, D. D is the correct answer. One idea or set of ideas offered as a reason to believe another idea. This was material from the very first class. Yeah? Is there any other question, any other answer that I should seriously consider? No? Okay. Okay. 2, when they are different, what distinguishes arguments from explanations? D. D is practically it's practically verbatim from my explanation of the difference between arguments and explanations, right? Any worries and or objections? Going, gone. True or false? You should always believe the conclusions of sound arguments. Yeah. False. Why is that false?
Because something could be sound and valid. Or, yeah, something could be sound but still untrue.
No. No.
What about equivocation? All banks have rivers. Or all rivers have banks, all banks have vaults, all rivers have vaults.
That is either invalid or unsound depending on how you parse it. So it's either, so an equivocation is either a problem in the inference or a problem in the truth of one of the premises. So all rivers have banks, all banks have vaults. You've made an error there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Right? So it's either one of your premises are untrue or your inference was invalid, and therefore it's unsound. Okay. It was a good shot, though. It was a good shot. No, you should always believe the conclusions of sound arguments. Sound arguments are ones in which all the premises are true and the argument is valid, and therefore the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. So you should always believe it. Yeah? Yeah?
From the problem sets we were doing, I think we had questions where we said arguments are sound / valid, right? So is argument to be sound but not valid?
No, arguments can never be sound but not valid.
So that's not possible.
It is not possible because soundness is validity plus true premises.
Yeah, by definition, it has to be that.
Yeah.
And it says it in the slides.
Right. Yeah. The set of all sound arguments is entirely contained within the set of all valid arguments. There are no sound but invalid arguments. Yeah?
You can have invalid or valid
That's right.
That's the only.
So there, you can have valid and sound, valid and unsound and unvalid, but never ever sound but invalid. This is contained in the concepts, like the idea of soundness is validity plus true premises. This is important. These are like the getting validity clear in your head, getting soundness and validity clear in your head are crucial moving forward. You've got to get these because these are the foundational concepts of the course, because they're about the structure of arguments, right? The structure of an argument is valid if the premises, if they were true, would guarantee the conclusion. And then you have to ask questions about whether the premises are true. Yeah? Good. Okay. Now we're getting into the messy ones. Is the following plausibly interpreted as an argument? Yes or no? Plato was a great philosopher, and he thought that nothing was more important than virtue. He is wrong. I think it is not plausibly interpreted as an argument. I see no plausible interpretation of this as an argument.
It's more than just like a statement.
Yeah, it's an assertion of a point of view, which is not an argument. Because as we said, an argument is one reason given as a reason to believe another argument. Yeah? Okay. Right, so is the following plausibly interpreted as an argument? Yes or no? It pays to get to the theater early because you have a better chance of getting a good seat.
Yeah.
I would say that yes, this is plausibly interpreted as an argument. Could totally be an argument. Is not necessarily an argument, but there's definitely a reading of this. There's a context in which that would be a reasonable argument. Okay. Is the following more likely an argument or an explanation? So this is likelihood. It's a bit fuzzy, but it's cool out today because of a high pressure system from over the Atlantic Ocean.
Explanation.
Right. I think it's more likely to be an explanation because it's cool out today is the thing that's being because'd, is being explained in this case, or it would be, if it was an argument, it would be the conclusion of the argument. But it's obvious whether it's cool out today to anybody who has sensory receptors that work, but not obvious whether there's a high pressure system over the Atlantic. So here something less well known is being used to explain something well known. Yeah? Okay. Okay. Which of the following is true about a reportive definition? It is, yeah, go ahead. It tells us how the term is generally used. Yeah, that's what a reportive definition is. That's just what it means, is a definition that gives the standard usage of the term. Yeah? Okay. I find it hard to picture how one could argue with this one. Okay. Which of the following is true about a stipulative definition? It cannot be incorrect. You can't be wrong when you stipulate a definition, because that's what it is to stipulate something. You're just saying, okay, for the purposes of this conversation, this is what I mean by whatever. So it's not a thing that you can be right or wrong about, unlike a reportive definition, which you can be right or wrong about, or an essentialist definition. Yeah? Far so good. Okay. Which error does the following definition contain? A nurse is a woman who is trained to look after the sick.
Too narrow, bro.
So if this is too narrow, how is it too narrow?
Women only are nurses.
Right, of course there are men who are nurses as well, so it's too narrow. How is it too broad?
Nurses aren't the only ones.
Sorry?
There are other people who take care of sick people.
Right, right. So I think too narrow and too broad. Yeah? Good. They're also, like, nurses are trained to do other things as well. Like if you're just really old, a nurse could be somebody who takes care of you. They train them for that as well. So there are other things that nurses are trained to do, and not all nurses are women. So too broad and too narrow. It's also people who are, there are other kinds of people. Sorry, the thing I just said was wrong. I was given a better answer from over here. There are other people who are trained to look after the sick. Doctors, for example. Doctors are a different category than nurses, so they get included under this definition, but they shouldn't be. Homeopaths also get some kind of training. But okay. Which error does the following definition contain? Pen is an instrument designed for writing words. B. Too broad and too narrow. So if it's too narrow, how is it too narrow? Excellent. So it's too narrow in the sense that it doesn't capture all the uses of a pen. And how might it be too broad? Tons of things are designed for writing words. So too narrow and too broad.
So what was the example of the first one?
Oh, well, a pen can be used to do lots of things. You can use them to draw or doodle or whatever. So writing words is by far not the only thing you can do with a pen. Yeah?
Keyword design.
Designed, yeah.
You can do a lot of stuff. I can drive my car with my legs. Doesn't mean it's designed to be driven with my legs.
Right. But pens are designed to do a lot of different things. So there's specific art pens.
Okay, yeah. No, I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point, but yeah, no, that I think even on that more precise reading, it's still too broad and too narrow. Okay. No, you're right. Everybody got this one wrong. There are no correct answers here. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Okay, so is the following statement analytic, synthetic, contradictory, or none of these?
Well, how can you check?
Well, you go to heaven and see if there's dogs there.
But you can't. What if there is no heaven? I said none of the above because none of them really make sense.
I had it as synthetic because it's a fact that could be true or false depending on the structure of the world.
But what if you can never observe heaven though? Yeah. Like
That's not the issue though. This is important. So it's not a question of whether you can actually make the observation that makes it synthetic or not, right? So this is the same as Pluto's full of gold. Maybe humans are just never able to, or like there's a star on the other side of the galaxy that's made entirely of candy, and humans could never ever make it there. Nonetheless, it's a fact that you know what kind of observation would be necessary to either make it true or false. And furthermore, it's not true just on the basis of the words. And neither is it clearly false on the basis of the words.
So any statement you make can be one of those three categories?
I don't know how you could maybe have a complete nonsense statement that doesn't get to be any of those, like where the words just don't cohere into a sentence or something. But yeah, I can't think of any that would go under none of those. Yeah.
When I was writing this, I was thinking that it was possible that this could be also contradictory. I guess if you see like heaven as a concept where like it forbids dogs, so it's like
I see.
paradoxical kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody actually wrote contradictory, but that was fun.
Did anybody have contradictory, if you recall? No. Okay, then we won't worry about it. But yeah, I mean, if you had a clear definition of heaven that said this is a place where only humans go, then this might be a contradiction. But I don't think anybody has, as far as I know, that's not a. What's the theological consensus on this? Do dogs get to go to heaven?
I remembered it from an episode of The Simpsons.
Right. There's a movie called this. There's the title of a movie. Aquinas says no. Oh, good to know. Good to know.
The heaven is full of just dogs. Include any other thing in the movie.
Was it just dog heaven?
Just dogs.
Okay.
So it's like a heaven separate for
Yeah,
dogs.
but there were some dogs that went to hell.
Yeah, but theologically there's no people, it's just dogs.
Okay. So let's, instead of getting way into this, let's move on, shall we? All right. So is the following statement analytic, synthetic, contradictory, or none of those? I know one thing. That I know nothing.
Contradictory.
Contradictory. I said contradictory. Take that, Plato. Socrates. It was Socrates that was supposed to have said this. Plato wrote it down afterwards. Right. I think it's fairly clearly contradictory. If you say that you know one thing and that that's nothing, then yeah. It's okay. I mean, I would love to dig into these if there's little niggling issues, even if you're not serious about your objection. That's fine. I think this is helpful to like think through this stuff. Yeah.
Can you just say that like it's kind of understood that it means nothing else other than that one?
Yeah. I mean, Yeah. It's a question of whether you're being nice about it or not. Yeah. So what would that make it? That would make it synthetic, I guess. I don't know. Did anybody say synthetic? Yeah? Okay, and what, do you want to defend that a little?
Yes, so I was thinking it's synthetic because you could actually check if the person actually doesn't know anything.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's how I look at it.
Okay, okay.
Also, going back to the previous question.
Yeah.
So, as far as I'm concerned, I know that the synthetic statements like relate to the world.
Yeah.
That's what I just saw, and I don't think heaven actually consists like heaven
Yeah,
part
that
of the
was-
world. So
yeah,
how are you actually going to check?
Well, okay, so this is I mean, it's a good point, but it's a question about like, it's a false statement. So if heaven doesn't exist or isn't part of the world, then it's a false statement that that all dogs go to heaven, right?
But there's no way of checking.
Yeah.
But again,
there's no-
it's not about having a practical method, right? So
You could check it
if there is in fact a heaven, then we'll all find out. So you do know what observation would count. It's that you die and then you show up at heaven and your dog's there. I'm serious. Like that's what would be the observation, right? Yeah.
You mentioned in class this, I'm not sure in which context, but you said you don't have to just consider this world, but you have to consider all possible worlds.
Right.
So what if you consider a paradoxical world compared to yours, where, I don't know, something that's true in this world is not true there. But now, is that contradictory or is that analytic?
So for something to be analytic, it has to be true in all possible worlds. That's what it means to be analytic.
By
So
definition of all possible worlds means that it's not true in some other worlds.
no, because possible worlds are only consistent worlds. So possible worlds are defined in terms of consistency in the possible world semantics. This is how possible worlds are cashed out by the philosophers who use it to interpret modal logic. So all of the worlds in which there aren't contradictions are possible worlds. Those worlds in which there are contradictions are not possible, so they're not one of the possible
But
worlds.
contradictions in what sense?
For the purposes of this, it's contradictions in logic. So logical contradictions are ruled out as impossible worlds. There are a variety of other ways of cashing it out, but yeah.
But the truthness of a statement, like let's say I toss a coin, right?
Yep.
In some world it came heads, in some world it came tails.
Yep.
Is it true or is it false that the coin came tails?
So what we do is we index it to a world. So we say in our world it's true, in another world it's false. Sorry, yeah.
See, I just understood this question as the same thing as like unicorns exist.
Yeah.
It's synthetic because you can test whether or not unicorns exist. In some kind of way, you're gonna find out whether or not they exist.
Yeah.
So in some kind of way, you're gonna find out if dogs go to heaven or not. But there's that chance that you could test it if you really wanted to. That's why it's synthetic.
Well, it's again, careful to not phrase it in terms of the practicalities of checking, right? Because it could be, there's lots of synthetic truth, like dinosaurs had green skin. Suppose that that's impossible to check. It's nonetheless a synthetic statement because you know what kind of observations would confirm or disconfirm it. I'm sorry, we got away from your very interesting questions about, these are questions in what's called modal logic, and there's a humongous literature on this stuff, and the answers are in depth. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you know that all dogs go to heaven? Like it could be some dog could go to hell in other words.
Sure. I mean, that's like, if we're admitting that dogs going to heaven is conceivable, that it's not a logical contradiction, then it's not a logical contradiction to say that not all dogs go to heaven. But so either way, it's a synthetic statement. Yeah? So the category so even if it doesn't matter if it's true or false, the category is synthetic. Yeah? Okay, I saw another hand here.
So just if all dogs go to heaven turns out to be false, we know it's synthetic because it's a falsehood, not a contradiction.
Right.
Whereas, for instance, if I was to say white is black, that is definitely a contradiction.
Definitely. Yeah. And so there's no possible world in which white is black. I don't love the possible world semantics. I think it's weird and counterintuitive, but that's mainly how philosophers talk. So yeah.
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson. What about Michael Jackson? Please elaborate.
You said there was no possible world where white is black.
Okay. Let's never speak of that comment again. Okay. Okay. I don't love these questions either. I think they're hard, but it's worth having these categories in your head, even if they're not as crisp as you want them to be. Okay. Yeah.
If I just say some nonsense like A is always equal to B without stating what A and B is, what do you do with that? Without giving
So that might be a case of none of the above, because it's not a in. If in
Why not synthetic? Because you actually have to check, like you could actually check, reference whatever A and B is after doing further investigation, then you can say whether or not that statement's true or not.
But what if they turn out to be analytically true? Like, you know,
But if they turn out to be, you'll find out.
so in logic, if you say something like A equals B, and you don't put a quantifier on it, then it's not a well-formed formula. So this is just not a all A's or B's is not a well-formed formula in logic. So it's nonsense. It's basically nonsense. It has no meaning until you put a quantifier. So if you put for all X, anyway, you need to put like an either there exists or they're all for all, or there does not exist or not for all around the thing before you start like using variables, or else the variables are just undefined. Okay. Yeah. All right, how are we doing? All right. This is actually less fighting than I expected. Feel free to keep pushing back. I mean, this is a course about arguments. Feel free to argue. This is what we're here for. All right. So we already did this one, but I'm actually kind of, all right, so what if we do the principle? I thought you made a really good point about this, Luke. If we use principle of charity, the charitable way to read this is, I know one thing other than this, that I know nothing else. So I know one thing, I know nothing except this one thing that I know. That would be a charitable reading of this, which would make it synthetic. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, but so are you gonna put two answers?
Yeah, two answers. We would go with two answers.
As long as you're putting two answers?
Yeah, we're good. The number of answers.
I don't want a contradiction.
There's no decreasing the number of answers that are available. If I thought it was the right answer and you put it on the test, it would be madness for me to say you got it wrong. So we can only increase the number of answers here. This is a very safe exercise for everyone, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so number 12, I'm gonna say we accept both synthetic and contradictory. Because yeah, I didn't think of that. I just thought, oh, Socrates, what a jerk. But yeah, no, if we're reading this with even a little bit of charity, then yeah, it's synthetic. Very good.
So how do you make it charitable?
Well, okay, so you say, I know one thing that I know nothing, and it's kind of implied except for that one thing that I just said that I know. So this I know nothing becomes slightly non-literal, right? You're using it as a, you're not saying I absolutely know nothing, there is nothing that I can know. It's just I know nothing except that I know nothing. If I was saying this, I would want you to interpret me that charitably. And I hope that you would want people to interpret you that charitably as well. Yeah.
what if you just say, I know nothing on its own?
Yeah.
Is that contradictory? Like, can you turn it synthetic in some way?
Well, yeah, you could say that because it's like, do you know anything in math? It's like, I don't know anything in math. That's like, you definitely know something in math. Like,
I think so. I think if the I know nothing. It's like a liar's paradox, isn't it? So if you say I always lie, that's a paradox because if it's true, then it's false, and if it's false, then it's true. So that gets into contradictory. I think the I know one thing kind of helps you know how to read it in a charitable way. So I think those are different in my opinion. Yeah.
So, in order to know that one thing, you would have to know why, and that would include another thing. Two things, and there's a contradiction.
Let's leave well enough alone. let's leave well enough alone. Fascinating questions for epistemology. Let's do critical reasoning instead. All right. So, is the following statement analytic, synthetic, contradictory, or none of these? Analytic. This is the easy one. Yes, $10 is $10. The kind of thing that drunk people say. Okay. Is the following statement analytic, synthetic, contradictory, or none of these? No one has ever turned lead into gold. Synthetic. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you argue that alchemy is like the alchemy is say common knowledge that alchemy can occur?
It is common knowledge. It is also false because there have been cases where people have turned lead into gold. You have a lead-line particle accelerator, and a bunch of different like atoms get produced on the sides of it, some of which are gold. So it has actually happened that lead atoms got transmuted into gold atoms. Fun fact for the day. So it's also not, I mean, it's not physically impossible to turn lead into gold. There are, if you get enough energy, if you dump enough energy into lead, a whole bunch of stuff will come out, and some of it will be gold. Okay? Yeah?
For that last question, like, you just $10,
Yeah.
if you really wanted to categorize it, I would have said circular, which is why I wrote none of the above. Because you want like a, like the most definitive term to describe that, it's circular, right?
So we talked about circular definitions. We didn't talk about circular statements. Not being offered as a definition, I don't think.
But you said, which of the following, like following statements, so if it is circular statement, it's a circular, so it could be monological.
I'm not really buying it. So it's not a, the analytic fits it really, really well. There's no bad fitness. It fits the analytic category perfectly. If you say A equals A, that's an analytic statement. That's like the classic analytic statement. For whatever A is, that's it. Circularity is about when you're trying to explain how a word works or to define it. It's just a different kind of category than any of these.
But like it's like if we think this in a real life, it's like you're saying $10 is like $10. So I have a $10 like $10. So it's kind of circular in some sense, like in some circumstances, like given some state, given some places. So I think it could be understood that as a circular in some places and ideas.
Maybe.
Wouldn't circular be something like $10 is 10 to $1?
That would also be analytic, I would say. That would also be analytic. So the only way D can be true is if this statement doesn't fall into any of these categories. It's fine to say this statement falls under a variety of categories, so it might be under some broad sense also circular, but it definitely falls under one of these categories, A.
But you said before the test that if there's ambiguity in some questions, you will accept the one that could be regarded as the answer. So it could be understood.
Absolutely, but there's no ambiguity in this question.
There is, it could be synthetic.
No.
Yeah.
No.
What if I could buy 10 male deers for $10?
That would be $10 are $10. Not $10 is $10.
Okay, what if you reverse it?
No, I don't think so. I think this is just so obviously an analytic statement that there's not a lot of ambiguity in this one. And it's certainly not the case that, like, to get to D, all of the other ones have to not fit at all, right? So none of the above says all of these are false. So the only way that it could be none of the above and therefore circular is if it's none of these. And I don't know of any argument to say that this is not analytic. Weird ambiguities aside. Yeah? It's a good shot. It's a fair try, but I don't buy it. Yeah? Yeah.
Also, just like on the charity thing, like if you did kind of assume that somebody said $10 is 10 deer or 10 deer is $10, like when you even invoke principle of charity, like nobody would interpret that as the first thing you mean, like, or you wouldn't even be sure like what you'd be referring to.
Yeah, you'd have to be pretty.
Yeah.
I guess
Not getting
you'd have to be trying to be unclear if you were saying it that way.
Which violates the principle.
Okay, let's keep going. So, yeah, we did that one already. Select the answer which best describes the following statements. I will give Peter and Julia $10 if they clean the kitchen, and careful, the curry is quite hot. So what do you say? I thought they were both ambiguous. Yeah. Because, of course, I will give Peter and Julia $10 if they clean the kitchen. Are you saying you'll give Peter $10 and Julia $10, or are you saying you'll give Peter and Julia $10? The difference is between $10 and $20, or between $5 and $10. Sorry, it's between 10 and 20. Yeah. Right.
Why is statement 2 ambiguous?
Careful, the curry is quite hot could mean that it's spicy or that it's temperature hot. Yeah.
I'm just saying that I will give them as a whole $10. I'm not thinking about giving them separately.
So why is the second thing not a valid reading? Why is the second? So you say I'm only thinking of giving them both $10
No, I'm giving them
as a whole.
yes. And let them to split.
So why is that reading the only one and not the I will give each of them $10?
It should be vague because it's not clear.
Well, it's ambiguous. Yeah.
Can it be vague because it's not specified what they mean by clean the kitchen? Because like there's different ways of cleaning a kitchen. You can say like organize the kitchen, but then there's also like wipe the kitchen down.
That's true. It's true that there is some vagueness in this, but I would say that's why I put very vague in here, because there's vagueness in literally every sentence. Not literally every sentence. Most sentences contain some vagueness, and it's extremely important that you not leave this class and go around accusing people of vagueness when they're speaking normally in a reasonably clear way, just because you now know that every statement contains at least a little vagueness. So I want you to identify very vague statements, highly vague statements, problematically vague statements. Sorry, a question over here, yeah.
So would it be the reading of statement 2 be vague still?
Potentially vague, but quite hot. So it's clear enough that what you're saying is that it's a sort of amount of hotness that would be unpleasant or that you should be careful about. I think that's clear enough to give you concrete guidance in the situation, and therefore not so vague that you're just like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah? Yeah?
Sorry, so you're saying actually the second statement is ambiguous, not vague?
Is more ambiguous than it is vague.
But whether it's hot, whether it's temperature or spicy, I don't know if that's relevant as the word quiet is, for me at least, it was more relevant because it really wasn't descriptive, so it's vague, whether it's like, could it be, like quiet for me could be very hot or could be little hot. So that's, I mean,
It seems like ambiguity, that it could be a little hot or a lot
quiet.
hot.
Well, that's vague. That's vagueness. So the
word quiet for me, that stood out more as a vague rather than.
yeah. Yep.
Also, like, it's like the person who we're saying is regarding that as hot, but like it could be spicy hot, but it could be temperature hot, and the person who are hearing that is like could regard it as bad.
Yeah. Also.
Yeah.
So that makes it ambiguous. Yeah. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
but the person who hears that the statement could regard it as a bag in terms of temperature or spicy. Like it could vary.
That's not vagueness. That's ambiguity.
But I mean, like it could the idea like of being hot could vary on person to person.
Right.
Statement.
Right. So either one of those are at least slightly vague. The question is it very vague? Yeah.
But for me, the question of like which is worse, like so that second statement. So looking at whether it's more ambiguous than vague or more vague than ambiguous.
Yeah.
I kind of think they're kind of the same because even if you say quite hot, if you say temperature, that means you have like a warm sensation in your mouth. But if it's hot, you also have a warm sensation in your mouth. So I kind of don't really like. You're being a little ambiguous between the term hot, but it's like it's going to be the same consequence in terms of the feeling.
Because you
You really
Not really, because you can wait a little while and it'll cool down in one sense, but it will remain spicy in the other
So
sense.
you can drink milk.
Well, okay, but
But also,
you recognize that there's a difference between kinetic energy and capacity, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So there's two readings of this. Yeah.
Why does that make a difference?
What do you mean? What is it?
Why does their definition, like they have two different meanings, right?
Well, that makes it ambiguous, which is what the question's about.
No, but his argument for them being very vague is actually quite valid, is it not?
I didn't think he was making an argument about it being. Were you arguing for it being
I
vague?
was saying that I mean, I answered as the second one being vague because it didn't seem that as severely ambiguous as it would be vague. Because the way you said it was like, which is worse, like the ambiguity or the vagueness.
Right.
And I would say, well, it doesn't really matter, but I actually kind of interpret it to be more vague than ambiguous because in ambiguity, yeah, there's a little ambiguity in the hot versus hot, but quite really it's just I have no idea what the notion is of like what the.
So I thought it was not that vague because if somebody's warning you, they're saying it's too hot for you to eat, or it's hot enough that you should be warned about it. But actually, you guys are making a decent case for this one. So that would mean they're both. So I thought the both statements were ambiguous. So I had C. What was the B and C?
Yeah. First one's obviously
Ambiguous.
Yeah.
Is that the room all right with that? If we say B and C? B and C, done. Great. This is the problem with vagueness, because there's always vagueness, and how vague something is itself vague. But, okay, so B and C. Moving on. How long have we been going here? Whew. Do you want to take there's 10 more or something. You guys want to take a 5-minute break and come back at this? Let's push through. All right, so let's do this. So select the answer which best describes the following statements. I'll give you $50 if you get your life on track. And Justin Trudeau argued against the artificial insemination of women in Parliament. Yeah.
I said the first statement was very vague because what does getting your life on track mean?
Yeah.
And that the second statement was ambiguous because you could either say that Justin Trudeau doesn't want the women of Parliament to get artificial insemination,
Right.
or that Justin Trudeau doesn't want for women to get artificial insemination, and he argued that in Parliament.
Right. Very good. Very good. Does that sound right to everybody? That sounds right to me.
Great.
So the answer was statement 1 is vague because what does it even mean to get your life on track? And it's what I tried to make this sort of clear, the vagueness of this was a very concrete and specific reward for an extremely unclear task. Like, if it's I'll think better of you if you get your life on track, that's kind of like a vague reward for a vague task, but this is like something very specific and concrete associated with this extremely vague thing. Okay. On which reading, if any, is the following argument valid? So what reading of this dogs love to play would make this valid? The universal reading. It's the only one that would make it valid. Right? Because you cannot infer, if you say dogs in general love to play, that does not entail that Gonzo, who is a dog, loves to play. Yeah? Good. On which reading of the following statement is most plausibly true? Birds dance when they hear music. Yeah. So
Because there must be some bird that exists which dances when they hear music.
right. So it's plausible that there is at least one bird that dances when it hears music. Yeah?
I don't know how true this is, but I was once heard from a teacher that humans are actually the only animal that have rhythm. It's like one of the like a key characteristic of people is that we can time beats and measures, and we have these that ability to count patterns?
Well, I suggest your professor goes on YouTube and looks at the hilarious videos of dancing parrots. They're hilarious and adorable, and that's what I had in mind when I was writing this. So there's at least one bird in the world that dances when it plays music, but I don't think it's true that generally birds do that. Well, so the generic reading is not plausible. Yeah, certainly the universal reading is not plausible. The generic reading is not plausible because it's not like generally speaking birds do this. Yeah.
What if you thought like that's a general way of speaking, but birds don't actually dance? Like they just, fly around and you think of it as dancing. So like you would say it's a generic reading because you can speak of birds doing that, but when you think of that, you don't think of them actually dancing. You think of them just moving around.
I think that's more of a metaphorical reading than a generic reading. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's more metaphorical. Yeah.
So when you say there exists reading, like, okay, since you're breaking it down in categories, universal reading, generic, and existential. So existential would be a part of generic and universal in some sense, right? Like, there's at least one.
If something is universal, then it's certainly also generic and existential, and if it's generic, then it's also existential, but yeah, it doesn't go the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
how are you denying the fact that it's generic? I'm just curious.
well, because it's not the case that generally birds dance when they hear music. That's not a feature of birds in general, right? Not most, not even many.
What you just said. There's enough YouTube videos that prove say otherwise.
I don't think that something is on YouTube only shows that it has happened, not that it generally happens.
So like, is existential more like?
What about the quantity of the videos?
The quantity matters. The quantity matters. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's actually, how much would you say would satisfy for general?
A lot. So a large portion of the total population. Hang on, we got tons of hands. Hang on one sec. Yeah.
Even if we agree that the generic reading is true, can we still argue that it's not the most plausible?
Very good. Okay, so the most plausible reading of this is not really generic, I would say. Yeah.
Because if you substitute any bird into there, if for the generic, they would have to have like a 50-50 chance of at least dancing or not. But if you're saying the existential reading, if you have that specific type of bird that dances, then it's always going to be true.
Yeah. That's what I would say. This was my reading.
So like if you say existential, that's like almost borderline they don't, but it's unreasonable to say that they don't. So just like the bare minimum.
So it's just to say, if somebody says birds never dance, I'm like, no, yeah, birds dance. I saw one on YouTube.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is there exists at least one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you defining as dancing then?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think birds dance when they're moving around to music.
I just Googled this.
I just think they're doing their thing with dancing.
Dancing is rhythmically moving to music. I think it is. Yes, I do think it is. Is that not a reasonable?
Principle of charity. It's a reasonable rhythm and dancing.
So are you arguing for the no reading is plausible?
Yeah, I don't think it's a plausible statement because it's just like birds dance when they hear music, but like
It's anthropomorphic.
Sure, you're anthropomorphizing them, I guess. So it's not at all plausible to you that there exist dancing birds.
no.
I think that's pretty hard.
I think they're dancing.
Okay.
Like I know you're finding videos on YouTube, but like I don't think they're dancing. Like I think they're just being animals, being cute and whatnot. But
Lots of hands here. Hang on. Yeah.
I think you should show us on YouTube.
I'm not sure that would settle it. Yeah.
Scientifically, they've talked about mating dances, so even if they don't dance according to music, they still dance in some kind of form. And we've scientifically seen mating dances. Oh no, you can add music to dancing.
Okay, we get a lot of comments on this. Yeah.
Similar idea, like how do you know that the music makes birds to dance or birds dance to make music?
Well, I don't think you can be certain. So the doubt here is reasonable. It's a reasonable doubt that you have. It's not that I'm like, oh, you're just talking nonsense here. But it's nonetheless seems to me plausible that they do. So plausible is different than definitely true, right? So there might be there's a plausible reading of dancing on which birds dance. They do mating dances and they do rhythmic movement to music. So they do highly choreographed mating ritual dancing, and they also do rhythmic movements to music. And those seem to me enough to say that it's plausible that they dance.
And also, like, I want to say, like, how can you say the bird, like, not a bird, but like the bird could dance? How do you define the dance movement?
Well, I don't think, in order to answer this question, I don't think we have to have a crisp definition. There just has to be definitions that under which it's plausible. So you can say there's a variety of definitions of dancing. There just has to be at least one where it's plausible. Yeah? Okay, this is great, you guys. We should have a test every week, and we'll just argue about it the other half of the week. Yeah?
Oh, so the dance means building a shelter in, I think, Greek or like some, I think it's in Greek. So I could argue, like, because it's dance is origin from the Latin, I think, and then from the Greek. Then I could argue, like, there's no field could, like, building a shelter, because there is no shelter in this dance.
There's no what? There's no.
Dance literally means building the shelter, like originally in Greek.
I'm not sure that you can. So what you're doing is trying to use the etymology of a word to build its definition, and that's what's called the etymological fallacy. So you can't always read from the original origin of the word what the word means today, because words, of course, change over time. Yeah. Okay, let's move on, shall we? Okay. Sorry, this is high stakes. I understand if this is making you tense. All right, so when someone provides information that they know to be false, which of Grice's maxims are they violating? Quality. Yeah. Okay. When somebody provides information that is true but irrelevant? Relation. Yeah? Okay. And here we are. We're at the diagrams.
Wait, we still have 5 more questions.
We do have 5 more questions. What did I do with the other 5 questions?
We gave up.
Oh, man.
Because it's always P equals P.
Yes. I forgot to put them on there. All right, so here we are. Okay. 21. Is the following argument pattern valid or invalid? If P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. That's a valid argument pattern. It's modus tollens, or denying the consequent. Okay, what is the name of the following argument pattern? C, disjunctive syllogism. Yeah. Okay. What is the name of the following argument pattern? If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. Affirming the antecedent. Yeah? Good. These are hard to argue with. So, all right, so what is a valid conclusion to draw from the following 2 premises? If P, then Q, if Q, then R. A. Yeah. Okay. And what is a valid conclusion to draw from the following 3 premises? Either P or Q, if Q, then R, not R. P. Okay. Okay, now let's really take a break, and we'll talk about the diagrams and then talk about the rest of the thing. All right, 10 minutes, we'll come back. So please do not panic if you see a diagram that you did not draw. These are not the only diagrams we're accepting. These are the ones that I thought were right. But Michael is a kind and generous and open-minded guy, and he will look and see if your specific diagram makes any sense and do his best to mark it. Okay? So here's how I broke this down. So advertising is not manipulative, as some people think, blah, blah, blah. So the main thing advertising does is provide us with information. Providing people with information isn't manipulation. Another function is to entertain. Entertainment isn't manipulation. Conclusion, advertising isn't manipulative. And this is how I diagrammed it. Yeah?
We didn't have to write it all out of the formula like that. We could diagram it like we were in class, right? With just like brackets.
I think I did ask you to write it out.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the instructions said to write it out. Yeah. Yeah. He might accept that. We'll find out. We'll find out, and if it's a big problem, then we can renegotiate. But yeah. Okay. So does this look plausible to everybody? This looks roughly right. I think most of the class got like 4 out of 4 on this one. I think the average is really high. The next one is going to be the tricky one. Okay. So this every child is an artist thing. Again, please do not panic if this is not what you did. So here's how I had it. The first 3 should be easy. Every child is an artist. Artists make important contributions to society. So children contribute in key ways to society. P1, P2 in dependent relation with P3. Everybody like that part of it at least? Okay? Now, I took it that there was a separate argument for P3. Children are also the future, being future is key to contribution to society. Therefore, children contribute. Yeah? Okay, yeah.
Were we supposed to not add missing premises?
You were not supposed to add missing premises. So if you had P4 and P5 as one premise, that would be also correct. Okay? Okay, so if you did not add, so I kind of turned that one thing into 2 premises because I thought that one sentence contained 2 premises, but if you did just turn that whole thing into P4 pointing at P3, that is correct. Okay? Okay. Now, P3, P6, and P7, so children contribute in key ways. Given that they should contribute in key way, that they do contribute, they should be paid the same. And given that they pay the same, then we should expect the same amount of work. Therefore, expect the same amount of work. Yeah?
Would it be acceptable if P3 implies P6, which implies P7, which implies conclusion, instead of having triple
Right. So let me think of this. So children contribute, so therefore they should get paid the same, and yeah, like a chain rather than.
instead of having all in one.
Let me think for a second on that. Did a few other people do it that way? Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's just the way it's written, like 1 implies the next.
So, yeah, I took it that these were conditionals. So a conditional doesn't get broken down into, so you say, if it's raining, then the sidewalks are wet, doesn't get broken down to, if it's raining, therefore the sidewalks are wet. It's one premise that can be used in combination with other premises to entail something else, right? So I took it that these were conditionals. But I can see how you would read it otherwise.
Like, is that equivalent in like truth value? Like, if it's raining, then the sidewalk's wet. Like, A implies B.
No, because if it's raining, then the sidewalks are wet is true, but it's not raining and the sidewalks are not wet.
Are you saying that
So it's just a matter of like you can't take a conditional and break it down into one thing entailing the next. What you can have is a conditional plus the antecedent entailing the next. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Would it be possible at all to have a conclusion as a children contribution to society?
But then what do you do with the rest of it, I guess?
I guess now that I'm kind of playing this over and over, I guess it would be a missing premise, but because they contribute to society, then adults contribute to society as well, so that's why children should be expected to work as hard as adults.
But that's you're going beyond. So I take it that that's stuff that follows from P3, not stuff that leads to P3. Yeah.
Is it possible for the chain for P3 to lead to P6 to lead to P7 to lead to conclusion, or is it not? Like, would it be correct? if you had done it that way, just given the way that it was formulated, because it says given that children contribute, if they contribute, they should be paid the same as adults, and if they're paid, they should be expected to work the same way. So therefore, they should be expected to work as the same as adults. So can't you see that as like it leads to each other, rather than it is dependent to lead to that conclusion?
I'm gonna think about this more. Currently I don't think so, but I think I should think about it harder. I'm not fully possessed of my wits at the moment.
I can see how like the puzzle piece thing works
Right,
for it.
right.
But then also you could say that just because you can have given that children contribute to society, they should be paid the same as adults. Therefore, that can lead to the same, like it can lead to that like sub-conclusion of if they're paid the same, they should be expected to work the same. Therefore, the biggest conclusion, children should be expected to work as hard as adults. So they could be dependently leading to that conclusion, like independently leading to that conclusion as well as dependently leading to it.
Doesn't it break off after P7 because you don't have they're paid the same as a premise?
Right.
But that
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But if it's
Yeah.
implied, because if you say if they're paid the same, you should be expected to work the same amount.
But then you need the premise of they are paid the same because that's modus ponens or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think if you did it that way, that should be acceptable. Yeah.
If I included implicit premises, would that be like an okay thing to do?
I think it's okay. Yeah, I believe he'll mark that as okay. I think the main thing to do here is to kind of see how Michael marked them, and then if you're upset with the way your thing is marked, I will have office hours and you can come talk to me. Does that seem like really the best way of doing this is one-on-one in a case-by-case basis? Yeah. Okay. So I think the best solution here is to get them all back to you as soon as possible. You can take a look at what the actual mark that you actually got, and then we can talk about it face to face. Yeah. Okay. Or via email, whichever you prefer.
Are they all already marked, or are they still some?
No, I think Michael's still working on them. The plan being to get them done definitely by the weekend. Again, the drop date is the 31st, so we absolutely must get your marks back to you before then. So that's definitely going to happen, and hopefully even sooner than that, if at all possible. I've just scanned the multiple choice ones. The average was 75 or so, and no, it was exactly 75. And it will go up slightly because we've just included 2 more plausible answers, so I'll figure out a way to give you all credit for that if you chose those ones. So does that sound all right? Okay, that was intense, you guys. That was great. You've got really interested in the answers to these questions, which is fantastic. Okay, so yeah, this one's going to be a bit of a mess, and we're going to accept a bunch of different answers, and what we really need to deal with it is on a case-by-case basis. Okay, great. So just a really quick preview of how we're going to do the rest of the semester, like what's up for the rest of the semester. So far we've been doing what I kind of mentally regard as the boring technical preparation work. And now we're going to get into the actual fun, interesting stuff where we're saying whether an actual argument in front of your face is actually good or actually bad and why. So we're assessing argument. Before we've just been learning how to break them down into their parts and understand how their parts are supposed to be related. Now we're going to say, is this a good argument? Is this a bad argument? And why? This is the useful stuff to you now. So dealing with strategies for assessing arguments. And there are basically 2 approaches that the textbook and that we will go through, kind of a good cop, bad cop thing. So the criterial approach is where we talk about the things that are right in an argument. So talk about how those factors that make an argument good. So true premises, relevant premises, and premises that are enough to establish the conclusion. Those are the things that make an argument good. The fallacies approach, so that's the good cop. The bad cop is the fallacies approach, where we talk about the things that make arguments bad, the kind of errors, typical errors that are made in arguments. So we're going to learn to recognize the common forms of error and distinguish kind of valid and invalid appeals to authority, appeals to testimony, that kind of thing. Okay? So that's the broad approach. So you're going to live for the next 2 or 3 weeks in the world of acceptability, relevance, and adequacy. So we'll just very quickly go over these, and we'll go over them in a good deal more detail the weeks to come. So acceptability is just about the truth or premise, the truth of the premises. How acceptable are they? Is it true, or like, do we know that it's true, or could we check whether it's true? So we'll talk about, like, just because you don't already know that a premise is true, if it's checkable, then it's potentially acceptable or provisionally acceptable, something like that. Relevance is how relevant are the premises to the conclusion. In deductive argument forms, so one of the ways you say that premises are clearly relevant is by identifying a deductive argument form, either a deductive or an inductive argument form. You say, look, if Socrates, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Those two premises are clearly relevant to the conclusion because they form a modus ponens. So that's a guaranteed relevance structure. Yeah?
What if you just added some like extra junk that just kind of oversaturates it? Because it can still be deductively like.
Right. So
it follows, but you just added some nonsense just for the sake of.
Right. So all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, golf is a game, rainbows are pretty, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Right.
2 of those were irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So identifying which premises are relevant and which are irrelevant is the task here. Right. And adequacy. So do the premises provide an adequate reason for accepting the conclusion? So adequacy is like the goal here. A good argument is adequate to establish its conclusion, at least somewhat. They need to be both relevant and acceptable to be adequate. But even relevant and acceptable premises might not be completely adequate. Right? So it might be that an argument gives you some reason to believe the conclusion without going to the max and being like, oh, now I have to accept the conclusion. So adequacy comes in degrees. The question is, are the premises enough to make you ought to believe the conclusion? Okay, so that's adequacy. And I would propose the following formula. Acceptability times relevance equals adequacy. So these numbers are 100% absolutely made up and meaningless. So please do not assign any importance to the numbers I've got here. But just to make it a mathematical model, 0 would be like fully unacceptable, clearly false premises. 5 would be acceptable, likely to be true. And 10 would be like fully guaranteed true premises, right? So you get this scale of how acceptable are the premises. And then you do the same thing for relevance. So 0 would be like there are no relevant premises here. The premises are completely irrelevant to the conclusion. Somewhere in the middle is that there are some relevant facts. And to max out, you would have all of the relevant facts. So if you have fully acceptable, guaranteed true premises that are all of the facts that are potentially relevant to the conclusion, then you max out adequacy. You should believe the thing completely. Of course, I mean, typically you don't get there, right? Typically you don't get to the argument fully establishing the conclusion in any kind of like realistic context, obviously, right? Usually you get an argument that says, provides you some evidence for the conclusion, typically. I mean, that's the best you can hope for. And of course, the worst case scenario is the argument does absolutely nothing to establish the conclusion. I didn't forget. I ran out of paper to print off a new attendance sheet. So what I'm going to do is pass around the midterm attendance sheet, and I'll ask you to sign right beside your name. So not in the box, but just beside the box. Is that all right? All right. Sorry about that. All right. So this is it. This is basically the matrix that you're going to be working in for the rest of the semester. This is the good cop version. And most of our time is actually going to be spent dealing with fallacies. So where you're identifying oh, this is what it looks like to have an unacceptable conclusion or an only mildly acceptable conclusion. This is what it looks like to have irrelevant premises, premises that don't really relate to the conclusion. And then your assessment of the adequacy is dependent on how high on the scale either of those things do. Again, completely made up numbers. Please do not put any serious significance on these numbers. 0 and 10 are kind of real points on that scale, but everything in between is totally vague. So I wouldn't try to like quantify how good arguments are, but you get the idea. Hopefully that helps to give you a kind of internal model of how these things are supposed to be related. Right, so if you've got great premises, but they're not relevant, then the argument is inadequate, right? You get a whole bunch of really great true premises that have nothing to do with the conclusion, then it's an inadequate argument. Similarly, if you have a bunch of obviously false premises that would be relevant if they were true, it's also an inadequate argument. The standard scenario is where premises that are either likely or you could check them to be true or false that have some impact on the conclusion, so the argument is somewhat adequate, right? Somewhere in between the extremes. And that's almost all arguments, almost all the time. In anything other than a purely formal, if you're doing proofs, then your adequacy maxes out and you should believe the conclusion of deductive proofs of things. Yeah?
So it's more like kind of a personal call as to whether something's like partially inadequate or like the level of severity of the partial inadequacy.
This is the great sea of vagueness of informal reasoning, yes. So the degree to which premises are adequate to establish a conclusion is this very hard to pin down sort of thing. Yeah.
Is that also because of missing premises as well?
It can be because of missing premises. It can be because it's unclear what the conclusion is. So the degree of adequacy is related to how well do the given premises support a given conclusion. And if it's not clear how strong a conclusion somebody's trying to draw, then it's not going to be clear how adequate a given set of premises are, right? So a very strong conclusion needs very acceptable and relevant premises to establish it. Whereas if it's a very weak conclusion, then you don't need as much evidence to produce an adequate argument. So I thought some birds dance was a really weak conclusion that would be easy to establish with arguments. Clearly there was disagreement about that, but you get the idea, right? So adequacy is a fact about how acceptable and relevant a set of premises are to establishing a conclusion. How adequate are they to establish the conclusion? Okay, and that's basically what we're going to do for the rest of the semester. Yeah, question?
Are reductio arguments always adequate, fully adequate?
So reductio ad absurdum arguments, where you reduce the conclusion to absurdity, no, they are not always adequate for the following reason. So a reductio is when you take a set of assumptions and then derive a contradiction, and then you say, therefore, the assumption was wrong. But the trick about reductio is the logic does not tell you which of the premises was wrong. So if you're doing a reductio ad absurdum on like anything, then you don't know which of the premises that led you to the absurd conclusion are the one you should reject. Logic doesn't tell you. So if the result of your reductio is therefore we should reject premise 1, then it's not fully adequate. You need some reason to say, well, we can't reject, if there's 3 premises, you can't reject 2 or 3, therefore it must be 1. Then you could make it adequate. But yeah, it's not always fully adequate.
Is that applicable to every reductio ad absurdum argument?
Yeah, yeah.
What about the skeptic's argument?
Which skeptics are you?
Where they say, if I know that I'm in the room, then I'm not a brain in the vat, and then you go on from there. Because that one, the premise which you deny is quite clear.
Well, it's hard to deny the other ones. Yeah, so when there's only one premise that it's possible to reject, then the reductio is an adequate argument for the conclusion. Yeah, so good. Yeah. There's another question? Yeah.
But can you say that at least one of the premises were wrong?
That's right. You can say at least one of the premises. If you do a successful reductio, you can conclude that at least one premise is wrong. It's just the matter of the reason I don't want to say a reductio is always completely adequate is that it can be unclear which premise is the one to be rejected. Yeah.
Sorry, did you think this attendance sheet is from the midterm?
Yes. The attendance.
Because there were 2 attendance.
There were 2 attendance sheets.
Oh, okay.
Do not panic. If your signature is not on there, please don't sign in the box, sign beside the box. Michael and I had 2 sheets, so only half of your signatures are on that. It should be fine. The number of signatures matches the number of midterms, so. Okay. Okay, so if adequacy, relevance, and acceptability are not totally clear, fear not, we're gonna just pound those into the ground. We're gonna go over this until you're easily as sick of this as argument diagramming, maybe even more. But yeah.
So actually, something that just came to my mind is that you do reductio ad absurdum. So as you said, it's not unless you're operating in some weird realm where you can actually tell exactly which one might be wrong.
Yeah.
You can have at best case scenario say like at least one of them's wrong.
Right. Right.
Could you then use that as a basis to kind of now rank the likelihood of each one being?
It depends. It depends on the context.
Okay.
Okay. Let's set that. We'll do I think we'll do reductio at some point. So let's leave that aside. Yeah.
Is it okay to sign both blank? I signed because I thought I didn't sign it, so I signed.
Oh, okay. It doesn't matter. No problem. If you sign beside the box, not in the box, but if you did sign in the box, nothing bad happens.
I mean, I signed both of them.
Oh, both sheets.
I mean, both the blank and the one.
Sorry?
I signed twice.
On this sheet just now? That's fine. That's fine. There's no problem. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing bad. I'm not going to even look at I'm done with what's in the boxes already. I've already tallied them up and used them. So don't worry about anything in there. It also won't help you if you didn't show up to the midterm and you signed it. It's not going to save you. So, okay. Quickly, before we're done, let's talk about the argument analysis, which, by the way, has been posted. So the arguments for analysis are now on the Blackboard. There's 2 editorials. Both are a bit 500 words long, one from the Toronto Star and one from the National Post. If you're not, we'll talk more about like what editorials are supposed to do, because I don't know how much newspaper you guys read. You don't look like the newspaper crowd generally. You seem like more social media people. So I'd like to do analyses of arguments on social media. Please send me some if you have a good one. A nice short argument that we can analyze as a class. That'd be a lot of fun. But I picked these editorials because they're nice. Like the point of an editorial is to be a short argument for a clear thesis. And the conclusion of the editorial is almost inevitably the title of the editorial. They broadcast to you what they're about by putting it in the title. So that helps to reduce the ambiguity about what exactly the target of the argument is. So you're going to choose one of the 2 editorials. You're going to break it down into premises and a conclusion, just like we've been doing. But you'll see that not every sentence should be considered a premise, and you have to rephrase. So they should be revised and simplified. Don't just block quote them, because your argument analysis is only like 1,000 words or something like that, or 1,500, I think. And these things are 500 words. So don't do big block quotes. You're going to rephrase and revise them to be simplified. It's also cognitively helpful to have a short string. Like if you have a nice short string, it's easy to keep in your head. So you cannot keep 500 words all in your head all at the same time. But if you rewrite it into short little bite-sized chunks, it's much easier to move them around in your own mind. So that's one of the main techniques we're going to work with. Yeah?
You said, so just there it says the diagrams are optional.
Yeah.
Could we have like a separate section where you actually define like some kind of like diagram and you list like P1 and you say something, and when you make reference you say P1, not the whole sentence?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely, I'm going to talk about it in just one sec.
Okay.
Hang on. All right, so you're going to, all right, so I'll just do this now. So there's going to be 6 distinct sections. This is not an essay. You do not have to do an intro, conclusion. You don't have to write nice connective sentences or anything like that. What I want to see are at least these top 6 sections labeled as such: premise, conclusion, breakdown, and then you do P1, P2, P3, however you broke down the premises, and optionally a diagram. What you do have to do, so that's in the description of premise structure. So you have to give us some description of how the premises are supposed to relate to each other and to the conclusion. Could be a diagram, or you could just explain it in words. Either is fine. Then you're going to do a separate section on acceptability of the premises, and then a separate section on the relevance of the premises to the conclusion, the adequacy of the premise to establishing the conclusion. You're going to consider at least one counter argument. So what would a counter argument to the claim being made be, and would that counter argument be a good one? It's just a short paragraph where you like do a little bit of the other side of it. And then optionally, if you were using a bibliography in any of this, if you're using references, which is again optional, but if you do, then you include them at the end. Yeah?
We don't have to counter the counter argument, right? It's just enter as a counter argument.
You enter it as enter a counter argument and evaluate it.
Okay.
You don't have to counter it necessarily. So if you think it's a great counter, like if you think the editorial you chose is bad, then you say, here's a counter argument, and I think it's a great one. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a word line for this?
Yeah, there is, and I cannot remember what it is at the moment. Was it 1,000? Okay.
So what about the restrictions on like the length if you go over or under?
My general rule is 10% over or under is no problem at all. And then beyond that, it becomes small problem, medium problem. If you're 3,000 words, then it's a big problem. Brevity is the soul of wit. It's much easier to write something long and rambling than it is to write something concise and focused. So keeping it within the word limit is part of the challenge that we're offering you here. Yeah?
You said diagrams are optional for the second one, the second section.
Yep.
You mean like diagrams specifically detailing what each part is? Like,
So the argument.
you have your whole argument analysis. You have your whole argument and like P1s and like everything leads to your final conclusion.
Yeah.
Would you like it to be simplified? Be like, this is a section. This is why I chose this. And that's why it's in that format. No.
Don't do that. Don't do that. No. You're doing. So the first two sections are just your absolutely standard argument analysis, argument mapping stuff that we've been doing all semester. That's what you're doing. So you're breaking it down to premises and conclusions, and then you're telling me how the premises are related to each other in the conclusion. And that's exactly what an argument diagram does. I'm just saying you don't necessarily have to draw it out. You can if you find it helpful. It doesn't add to your word count, so that's nice. It also makes it more explicit what you're saying. So there are a bunch of advantages to using a diagram. I just don't want to make it mandatory. Yeah. And okay, so what I'd like to emphasize right off the bat, and I'll say this over and over again as we get closer to handing this thing in, you are not doing an analysis, you're not doing an argument about the topic of the editorial. Okay, and this is what you'll be very tempted to do. You'll be tempted to write an elaborate response about the subject of the editorial. You're not responding to the subject of the editorial. You're responding to the argument being made. So you can make a good argument for something you think is false. You can make a bad argument for something you think is true. So even if you agree with the conclusion of the editorial, that's not enough to know that it's a good editorial. What we want you to talk about is this a good argument for the conclusion? Okay, those are two different things. Most of the time when you're asked to write an essay, you're asked to establish the truth or falsity of some conclusion. What you're doing here is establishing whether this was a good argument for that conclusion. So your topic is the argument, not the subject of the editorial. Yeah?
So when you say that, I guess you don't want us to talk about like the truthfulness of his premises or something?
No, you talk about the truth. No. That's in the, in the acceptability of the premises. Well, no, because you can have a totally separate argument. So the biodiversity one. So one of the editorials is about biodiversity. Protecting Canada's biodiversity is important. You can totally believe that and yet think that the particular premises that they brought to bear are false. Right? So the argument for the conclusion isn't a good one, even if you think there are totally a bunch of premises that would have established it well. Yeah?
So if you think that they're false, would you have to find references where it says that they're false or not?
It would help. That would help in establishing that they're false.
So like, let's say they said killing deer is beneficial for biodiversity.
Right.
And then you would find a reference where it says it's the opposite.
That
You
would-
would use that to prove that.
That would be a darn good way of establishing the acceptability or lack of acceptability of that premise. Yeah.
What citation style?
Any citation style that lets us find the thing that you're citing. And random web pages don't count as citations.
Any preference?
Of which citation style? Doesn't matter. MLA is fine. MLA. If you want one, do MLA. It's the only one I can think of at the moment. So, but any one is fine. Chicago, MLA. Hey, I thought it too. All right.
You gave us like an example.
Yes, so what I'll do is, I have not yet done this, but I'm going to get permission from somebody from last semester who wrote an A or A+ argument analysis, and I'll post it on the Blackboard. It won't be exactly this structure because we had them writing intros and conclusions, but we'll give you at least one example, hopefully more. I have to ask for permission first, but of what an A+ version of this looks like. Yeah.
So you mentioned, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned just now that there is some kind of intro and conclusion component to that. So we're not doing that?
We're not, no, don't do since the dawn of time. It's wasted words in this context. Really, it's not argument, it's not essay structure at all. We're doing just labeled sections, get right into it, because I know what you're writing. You're writing an argument analysis. So I'm just gonna get some lights on here because it is getting very dark. Okay, right. So yeah, I don't need you to be like, ever since the beginning of history, man has wondered if biodiversity is best served by blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Just get right into so section 1, premise, conclusion, breakdown. Break them down. Section 2, description of premise structure. Describe the structure. Yeah? So this is to relieve you of the arbitrariness of writing an essay, which is a very bizarre, if you're ever wondering why essays are structured the way they are, they're training you to write journal articles, which like 1% of you are gonna do. So they're training you for a task that almost none of you are gonna be interested in doing. That's why essays are so weird. So let's not do that. Let's just do labeled sections so it's absolutely clear what you're doing in which part. You don't have to explain like, now I will assess the relevance. You just go bold, underline, relevance, and you talk about relevance.
Also, the tense, can you use like I?
Yeah, I is fine. There's no problem about that. That's a weird rule that people use to try to get people away from making really subjective statements. So like, I think this guy's a jerk. Well,
one would say this guy.
Yeah, you can totally just rephrase it and say, one would say this guy's a jerk. So it doesn't actually work the thing I think that it's supposed to do. So use I, that's fine. Try to keep it somewhat formal, somewhat professional sounding. Like it should sound like something that you'd hand to your boss. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see like really casual, don't do text speak. Like keep it professional. Something that you would hand to a boss that doesn't like you that much. How about that? Right, that should keep you on track in terms of the tone of the thing. But yeah. Okay. We will talk much more about this. So if you have questions, there'll be plenty of time to answer them. Yeah.
About the submission for August 4th.
Yeah.
Do you have to see everything for that submission for you to like mark it or like to comment?
No.
Okay. You can have like only acceptability, relevance, and then not have adequacy, and then just have like the premise breakdown, and that should be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're wondering what Andrew is talking about, she's talking about my offer that if you give me a draft before August 4th, I'll give you comments on it.
Yeah, you
So.
said we do it multiple times.
Yes, I did. Yes, foolishly, I said you could. Oh, I'll just drag my feet getting back to you, because very few of you will actually do that, frankly. But yeah, so the offer's on the table. If you want me to look at what you've got, I'll look at what you've got. Get it to me on or before August 4th. Yeah.
What about office hours? Could we like, I mean, not
Yeah.
submit like formal like drafts, but like just like bounce ideas off?
Yeah. Make an appointment and we can talk. I think my office hours are going to be jammed for the next little while doing the mapping stuff. I would be very happy to do that over email as well, but yeah.
Or if you want to do the diagrams, would you like them embedded into the thing, or would you like it in like an appendix or?
Embedded. Yeah. You do it in this. So in this second section, description of premise structure, if you're doing a diagram, put it in that section, just right in the text.
Is it okay for you to use, like if you're describing that structure,
Yeah.
is it okay to do like jot notes or like have like a little like paragraph kind of blurb right beside it?
Sure. Yeah. No problem there. Yeah. Some combination of diagram and text. That's totally fine.